On this worksheet called Chart Filter, we're seeing two charts that are identical in terms of content, and they're both based on the data we see in rows 19 through 25. In Excel charts, you might or might not know, the default setting is to only show visible data. Now, beneath each chart, you see a phrase. On the left, plot visible cells only. On the right, plot all cells. The standard is to show only the visible cells. So if I were looking at this data here, and let's imagine we had only the left chart visible, the one with the white background. If I were making a presentation and maybe leading into the presentation, I didn't want to show Missouri and Kansas, I'll just hide those rows maybe ahead of time. So I'm dragging across rows 23 and 24, right click and hide. And I've hidden the rows. And furthermore, the chart reacts immediately by not showing the information from those two states. Meanwhile, the other chart is showing all the data. Now, you wouldn't have both these charts next to each other, but we certainly do here, and I want to contrast the two. What if, for purposes of a dynamic presentation, you might have a bigger list of states, maybe eventually all of them, and at different times, depending upon the discussion or what the debate might be about in terms of the sales that we're talking about here maybe, we want the quick ability to hide and reveal and make the chart change instantly data from certain states. So I'm going to press Control-Z to undo the data that I had hidden. And then simply highlighting this data right here in cells A19 through A25, I'm going to apply a filter. Those of you who have worked with filters know that what a filter ultimately does is it hides rows. So with this data highlighted, I'll jump to the Data tab in the ribbon and choose Filter. And it simply puts an arrow there. Now, if I click the drop arrow and make a choice or two, it will hide the rows that I don't want to see, and that chart to the left will respond immediately. So maybe you're having a discussion about sales, and of course, again, the number of states here could be a lot larger than the list we're seeing, but we click the drop arrow. How do we unselect? We simply uncheck a box. We're only interested for the moment in showing Colorado and Kansas, so let's hide Illinois and Indiana by unchecking the boxes here, Missouri, Ohio. Click OK. We're only seeing those two states. Now, the ability to show the data, which sometimes is necessary, possibly you've got another scenario where maybe at different times the data is being hidden for one reason or another, but you always want the chart to show data. If you right-click a chart and choose Select Data, there is an option called Hidden and Empty Cells. The default setting is for this box to not be checked. Show data in hidden rows and columns. Here it is checked, therefore the chart on the right will always show the data. Now if I uncheck it and click OK, immediately you see, even before I click OK, that it's only showing the data for Kansas and Colorado. And again, I stress you wouldn't have these two charts next to each other in a typical scenario because it's probably the one you're going to be using on the left if you're doing filtering. So imagine scenarios here where you could be using certainly data other than states. It could be all kinds of different situations where these might be products or it might be different locales and so on. But we got this ability to tie together two different features in Excel. One is the filtering and one is the ability to either show the data in hidden cells or not. And coming back here again, different scenario, we're talking about the sales. Let's just look at more of the Midwestern states here. Let's leave out Colorado this time. How about Missouri, Kansas, and the other ones here? Click OK. We're not seeing Colorado. Now there's another factor in here that comes into play too. When you're jumping back and forth, what if we were only showing entries from Kansas? Now the highest entry in Kansas is 200 or something like that. Let's click in here. Let's just unselect them all, show Kansas only. Now, if this were a typical chart, it had not been altered in other ways, you might be saying, well, why doesn't the automatic scaling kick in? That's something you want to be thinking about. What I've done ahead of time here is I've double-clicked the left axis. And off to the right, I've overridden automatic scaling. Now, if I click Reset here, look what's happening to the chart right now. We're seeing 250. So what you want to be thinking out is this idea, okay, we're looking at Kansas. We have a visual image of how tall the columns are. We click the drop arrow. Now we're going to show Ohio instead. We click OK. The numbers are different to be sure, and yet visually we still might be remembering Kansas. Okay, the columns here may be a little bit taller, But look at the scaling. It's 400. So in looking at this data ahead of time, you might want to consider, let's go back and show all the data. What's the highest value in here? It's not quite 400. We can, of course, set that to be anything we want, but consider the idea of overriding automatic scaling so that any time you're showing entries here, we always have the same number on top. So double-clicking here, we can go off to the right, minimum, maximum. I've set it at 400. Maybe 500 will look a little bit better. We'll have more white space, maybe above the numbers. But that means at no point will automatic scaling kick in. So no matter which states we're looking at, even the ones with not that many entries, going back to Kansas for the moment, we still see the scaling topping out at 500. That was done in the other chart off to the right as well too. You can do that on any chart. So different thoughts here about how you might use the filtering capability of Excel, also the ability to display information by adjusting the axis totals on the left-hand side. But overall, this concept of showing visible cells only, that's what Excel normally does, possibly plotting all cells. Different ways to display the data using a filter.